Welcome to Creating Presence. I'm Dr. Sandra Bloom, and I'm here with my co-host, Sarah Yanosy.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Sandy.
Hey, Sarah and I spent the last 25 years working with leaders across the United States and around the world to build trauma-informed workplaces and to transform service delivery for nonprofit, government, and for-profit organizations that exist for the purpose of helping people. In this podcast, we will share our insights, experiences, and knowledge to inspire leaders and other professionals to put these ideas into practice. So let's start today's discussion with one of the skills we teach in creating presence that can be helpful for leaders who are facilitating meetings, because we often forget that there are important things we need to do to actually create a group. It doesn't just magically happen.
So, our creating presence skill, presence meetings, really just very simply are constructed by asking 5 questions to each person who's part of the group. And those questions are, who are you? Mostly if people don't know each other. What feelings are present? What do you want to do, be, or accomplish in our time together? What's something that makes you feel grateful? And who can you count on that's here today? And each of the questions has a specific purpose connected to trauma-informed practice. And there are also some caveats as well for each of the questions. Sandy, let's talk about the purpose of the questions.
Okay, so naming feelings is the beginning in yourself and being able to recognize them in other. It improves emotional wisdom of the whole group over time. And you have to know that at first, people may be very hesitant to share what they really feel. But as others do that and kind of take the big step forward, everyone's going to get on board. The second question is about focusing on the future rather than dwelling in the past, which all too often happens when a group gets together. And it also makes it more likely that we will actually reach the goal that we set together. Then the gratitude question, it's about shifting the sense of the group, helping people to settle down, lowers the stress level, and emphasizes that we have a lot to be really grateful for. And then the final question is about inspiring connection to each other to combat experiences that too often happen under conditions of stress, of isolation. And it sets a standard of mutual accountability and connection that's really vital in the world we live in today.
There are some caveats for the questions. When we ask what feelings are present, we are really encouraging people to use feeling words. I think, many of us, when someone asks, how are you feeling? We answer with good or fine because that's what's socially acceptable. But to do good trauma-informed work, we need to recognize our own feelings, role model identifying them, and we also need to role model appropriate vulnerability. When we're in any kind of human service setting, we have really high expectations of the people that we're serving, that they are going to be willing to do hard things in order to change. And so we need to also be willing to role model some of that vulnerability, even in just naming our feelings. I think it's also important that we name feelings and role model that we can manage them or contain them without feeling like we have to go into a full therapy session. I think that is often a worry that we have when we ask people, how are you feeling? That they're going to kind of take the next 25 minutes to tell us in detail why they're feeling what they're feeling. But in the presence meeting, we really want to help people just name and sit with and manage the feeling. There are times when it makes sense to ask a little bit more or to give some context, but generally we want to resist that urge to ask in more detail for the purpose that we want to accomplish. The second caveat is, when we ask the question about your goal or what, what we want to do, be, or accomplish, when you're in a leadership position, this is a really great opportunity to use as an intervention, to set your intention for the group and also kind of help regulate people's emotions. So if you are able to say as the leader, I want to be really present, or I want to be a good listener in this meeting, that setting that intention can really have a positive impact on the people who are participating. When we ask about gratitude, right, what makes you feel grateful? I think one of the opportunities that I try to capitalize on as a leader is to highlight the contributions of other people. So when I answer, what makes me feel grateful, I will often try to think of examples from the people who are in the meeting that might be powerful to highlight. And I'll share, I did a presence meeting with a team after I had to cancel a meeting and reschedule because I had to put my dog down. And when I know it was really awful, but when I answered the question, what I was really grateful for in that moment was like the very kind emails that people sent me when I canceled the meeting, offering their condolences. And I think that created, a sense of connectedness and shared humanity, and kind of leveled the emotional baseline for all of us. The last one, which is who can you count on? I think a lot of times we are socially programmed to say like, nobody, I will count on myself. And that happens a lot, especially for people who have been exposed to a lot of stress or trauma. That tendency to self-isolate or to feel isolated is a really strong pull. And so we want to encourage, even if if someone does say like, I'm going to just count on myself, one of the things that I like to do as a leader is to offer to be a backup person. So if someone's like, no, I'm just going to count on myself today, I will volunteer and say, I would like to also be on your list of people you can count on. And that I think is a really powerful message of connection as well.
Yeah.
So that's often how we, in creating presence, encourage staff meetings to start, to encourage meetings with clients, leadership meetings, wherever those questions might be appropriate to create group cohesion. That's what we want to try to accomplish. And some of that is really about building safety and building insight. And that's also what we're going to talk about today as we transition into thinking about leadership styles, because safety and insight are really at the core of how we think about ourselves as leaders.
Let's look at the forces that determine which leadership style you use at any point in time. And that's really important to emphasize because you need to have available different styles to deal with different kinds of situations that you're in. So things like how much time is available? Does a decision have to be immediately made because there's an emergency? The relationship style in the organization. You can change it if you're a leader, but it's going to take time. Where information is coming from, the level of training that everybody's had, what internal conflicts exist that you might have to take account of before you can really make any movement. How stressed is everybody? The stress level's really, really important. What task are you addressing? Is it something pretty simple or is it actually very complex? And what regulations, policies, or procedures exist that you have to respect? So when we think about that, what the styles are, how many different leadership styles there are, like there are lots of different frameworks for this, but we talk about consultative, bureaucratic, authoritarian, charismatic, laissez-faire, democratic, and democratic participatory are pretty much, they're very similar. So we'll talk about democratic. Consultative leadership is when the leader shares the problem with the relevant members of his or her team individually or as a group, getting their ideas and suggestions, but then the leader makes the decision that may or may not reflect actually what the other people said. So he's consulting other people, but may or may not be using the information. Bureaucratic leadership is about working by the book and ensuring that everyone follows procedures exactly. This is really appropriate style when you're dealing with any kind of major safety risk.
So in thinking about these two, the first two leadership styles, I know I really find myself leaning towards and liking consultative leadership. I think I like it because I really like one-on-one conversations. I like to like brainstorm with people and then go back and kind of do independent thinking and integrating of ideas on my own, so that really works for me. But one of the risks, and I've learned this the hard way of using a consultative style, is that if I have a one-to-one conversation with someone, I think I'm sometimes setting up the expectation that I'm going to implement what they're telling me. And that's not always the case. And so one of the risks is that people who are consulted with can feel dismissed or unheard or unappreciated if their ideas are not the ones that end up, coming out on the top of your decision-making process. With bureaucratic leadership, I often find that people who are new leaders really lean towards this style. I think because it gives them a sense of safety, that there's a right and a wrong way. And if the book says this is the right way and this is the wrong way, they don't have to feel that sense of personal accountability. And it sort of takes the pressure off. But the risk for that is that staff can often feel pigeonholed or stifled in their creativity because, it's like there's one way to do things and it's this way. And there's not a lot of room for, negotiation of that. It can feel really uncomfortable.
It makes me think of the bind that police officers can find themselves in because wherever they're in danger all the time or can be in dangerous situations all the time, they have to go by the book or they can get in luck. But that can cause huge problems. There's not a lot of flexibility to deal with the complex interpersonal problems that arise. So the safety risks are really so important and so problematic at the same time. I know it's kind of confusing there's a term called authoritative leadership and authoritarian leadership, and they're really very, very different things. So authoritative leadership is kind of mobilizing people toward a common vision and focusing on end goals. It's come with me. I know what I'm doing. I'm a pro, and it works best when the team actually needs a new vision because something has changed and they need to go in a different way, and they look to somebody in a position of authority, but somebody who says, "Come with me," not just, "I'm going to tell you what to do." That's more like the more confusing kind called authoritarian leadership. And this is when people are empowered via the position they hold. And they may hold power through some personal charisma that they have, but they expect unquestioning obedience. And they
Yeah.
often impose strict punitive discipline.
And this is sometimes, unintentionally or unintentionally, these result in people feeling fear. And this is especially difficult for anyone who has a personal trauma history, with interpersonal trauma or abuse. Um, and leaders sometimes fall into what we call the parenting paradigm, where if they're using an authoritarian leadership approach and kind of strict, systemic, punitive discipline, they are really kind of creating a dynamic where they're treating staff like their children. And when staff are cast into the role of children, they often do what children will do, and that's act out. And so a lot of times you'll see kind of, um, behavior that looks like, rebellion, or disconnection in that dynamic.
Acting out. Yeah. Authoritarian leadership is best used briefly and under conditions of emergency, when you really have to mobilize a rapid response, where people just don't have to think about it. They have to just do what they're told to do. It reduces complexity, but in emergency situations, you can't afford to really do a lot of complex thinking. And that's not going to happen. So, but if it's overused, then everything that you're talking about is likely to happen, because it encourages increased aggression and a more punitive environment, which is really damaging to being able to do complex thinking. Another leadership style is charismatic leadership. So this is when a leader injects huge doses of enthusiasm into the team, and it has a lot of driving energy. But charismatic leaders often tend to believe more in themselves than in other people and their team. So this can create a huge risk because to the entire organization, because the whole thing can collapse if the leader decides to leave. And in the eyes of the followers, success is tied up with that person, not with actually their own efforts.
I think there are a couple of other risks for charismatic leadership too. And I think I'll share a little of my own vulnerability. I think I have definitely found myself using this style of, like, where I felt like I really have to cheerlead. And I think one of the things that is a little embarrassing to share, but the team that I work with at my outpatient clinic, I learned that they refer to me as Mary Poppins. So when I walked down the hall, somebody was like, "Oh, hey, Poppins." And I was like, "I'm sorry, what?" Yeah, so that's how I discovered that was my nickname. But it can be really great. It's inspiring, and there is definitely a role for that kind of cheerleading leadership. But not only is it not so great for the rest of the team, it also can be really draining for the leader. Like, you can end up really feeling like you're pulling more weight than you should. You're kind of holding all of the emotional energy and not tapping into the wisdom or talent of the people that you're leading. So it's important to be really careful about that.
The next two leadership styles are my preferential. The first one's laissez-faire, free rein leaders. I like people to be able to do their own thing. I like them. I like to have in my team responsible, competent, thoughtful people, and I don't have to get in their way. They are able to make decisions. I like being able to delegate responsibility. I like avoiding conflicts whenever possible.
Yes.
I like for solutions to come out of the group and to emerge on their own. Um, and I can be flexible and can be influenced by what other people, do, what they say, what their learning experience is. But this is best in situations where you have a really well-organized, well-oiled, competent team. If you have new people, young people just coming into the setting, they're not ready for that. People have to really be prepared for that. So that leads to my other favorite leadership style, which is democratic, participatory leadership. And this is, hopefully people that are listening to this have some notion about democratic process, but it rarely gets talked about in terms of our workplaces and schools. And yet that's where we should be learning what democracy really means. So the leader in a democratic leadership style shares the problem with the relevant team members as a group, and then together they generate and evaluate what are the alternatives for this issue. It's really about a participatory leader has to determine how we're going to make the decision, but not enforce their own what they're going to do, what the decision has to be. And that's what differentiates this from authoritarianism. So the leader still has the final say and the ultimate responsibility for the decisions made. That's just the way things work, but shares an understanding of it all with the team members and distributes responsibility and empowers everybody in the group to really, that's why in creating presence, we emphasize a lot about building consensus, which takes more time and it's more complicated and it requires people to be civil with each other. And we have to learn how to do it. But in the long run, it's a much better way of functioning.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think one of the things that can be tricky about participatory or democratic leadership is you know, not using your position to influence the group. And it's hard when you, as a leader, are working to be a partner, but people see you as an authority figure. And so I found that there's some language that I try to use when I'm kind of embodying that leadership style. And, if I'm asking for, ideas or feedback, I generally will say something like, I'm going to share my ideas as well, but I want to open the floor to everybody else first to make sure that, like, if I say something, it doesn't turn into groupthink or conformity. The other thing I found is I try to make a point to express gratitude when somebody offers constructive criticism or shares an idea. And I try to make an effort to hold on to any counterpoints in order to avoid the risk of shutting people down. Because I think, like, I am clear that, as the leader, if I say something critical about an idea, that feels different from, somebody else who might offer that perspective. The other thing I find too is that the questions that I ask are a little bit different, and some of the things that I try to articulate also sound different. So I like to ask the questions, like, what factors are you taking into consideration? What feels most important for us to prioritize? What's your gut telling you? Like, those tend to be the questions I find myself asking when I'm being most participatory as a leader. I also ask, what might be a good enough outcome?
I think this is so important because the reason I even began talking about this was because the only way we came to understand as a team the whole issue of how all of the people we were working with had had childhood trauma, and it was trauma that was the underlying problem for all these wide variety of mental health problems, is because I had a Democratic team. And so we could look at this, all this puzzling information we were getting from people from all different points of view, and all of us could be heard so that the truth, the reality of what we were really contending with could emerge out of the process of the group. And without that, if we had just stayed in traditional psychiatric mode, we never would have figured it out. We would have denied it because it was so counter to the way we had been trained.
Thanks for listening to Creating Presence. Coming up after the break, we'll talk with Gerry Vassar, President and CEO of Lakeside, to continue our discussion about using trauma-informed practice in leadership.
If you want to develop a trauma-responsive culture within your organization, your leaders must be able to be knowledgeable and possess the skills to create positive change. Creating Presence, developed by world-renowned Dr. Sandra Bloom, offers an online training and coaching process that will help leaders become capable to cultivate a safe, productive, and values-aligned environment for your staff and clients. For more information, go to www.creatingpresence.net. Creating Presence is managed by Lakeside, your resource for trauma-responsive care.
Welcome back to Creating Presence. I'm Dr. Sandra Bloom, and I'm here with my co-host, Sarah Yanosy, and today we're focusing on leadership. And we're going to be speaking with Gerry Vassar, who is the CEO and president of Lakeside. Gerry has been building social, emotional, educational, clinical, and training programs for the past 39 years, though he doesn't look that way. He's brought his experiences from business, counseling, theology, and fundraising to create social entrepreneurship and business integrity. So welcome, Gerry.
Thank you, Sandy. Nice introduction. Nice to see both of you today.
Hi, Gerry.
Hey, Sarah.
Will you please share with our listeners how you describe your guiding values or your approach to leadership?
Yeah, I think effective leaders are really leaders who build positive relationships. Nothing good happens without strong relationships. So I look at it as building relational integrity over time that leads to trust. Because if you don't have the trust of your staff, you really don't have much at all. And in today's leadership world, trust is kind of short-lived. It's not something that people have. So I say, even to my new staff, I'm going to present to you our values that I do every year, and I want you to not trust me. I want to give you permission not to trust me until you see it becoming real. And, we're dealing with people. We're not dealing with machines. We're dealing with people. And so what do people want in a relationship? Truth, authenticity, respect, a listening posture, humility, humor. They don't want to be judged. They want you to be flexible. They love that you talk about their strengths. They want you to be solution-based. They want you to empower them to do those things. And they want you to have hope and vision. So when we're talking about leadership, we need individuals who live those values consistently over time, which will inspire staff to be involved in the mission of whatever your organization is trying to achieve, and to do that in a way that's safe and empowering to them. So I think that building relational integrity over time, building trust, and focusing on relationships is, to me, my core mission in being an effective leader.
Jer, how do you think about what trauma-informed leadership is and why it matters?
Well, I think we all have had a journey as leaders to figure out what that means. And of course, the recent research has really taught us a lot about what a trauma-informed environment should look like. But I think for me, it was important that I do my own work. I have to figure out what trauma is about. We had the ACEs research. What was that all about? We have the neurological research that talks about what happens in the brain. We have a program that describes that as from Dr. Bruce Perry's work about the neuroscience of regulation. And we realized that a lot of our clients weren't able to work with us all that well because they were so dysregulated. Um, but that's also true of staff. So they're dysregulated or they're have secondary trauma because of the clients that they're dealing with. And of course, I don't think that's any different in any sphere of influence in business or life or whatever we're doing. So it requires that in our language, in our policy, in our listening posture, in our supervision, how we problem solve, how we create relationships in groups and make decisions, that we're calm, that we're enthusiastic, that we're humorous, that we're safe, that we're resonant, and we're really building relationships again that are about our growth together, our growth as a democratic team, as you've already talked about. But these active discussions have to occur in the context of support and genuine care for each other, but also with a knowledge of what trauma and adversity and stress do to people in the way they function. And it does make a difference. If someone's in my office and they're tremendously stressed because of a home situation, I should be picking that up and giving them opportunity to express that in a meaningful and nurturing way, not getting to be their counselor per se, but to allow them to be human. And really, to me, dealing with the realities of adversity and trauma means I know what that means neurologically, relationally, emotionally, and how they're going to respond, but it also how I'm going to be sensitized, empathetic, and really focused on what they're experiencing here and now as we meet together, as it impacts what we're doing as a group.
I think you need to also mention the impact of the environment, of having a beautiful environment to work in, that really makes a
I
difference.
am a firm believer that we must give people environments that suit them, but also that's trauma informed. So if you look at facilities I've designed, which I have done that, I've made it very, very clear that people need an office that they love, space that they love, that they need community spaces as well as their own private space. I don't do cubicles, which are kind of depersonalizing. I try to make it so that there's privacy and there's community and there's great places to eat and there's great things to do. And you have environments where that it's a very pleasant place to work. So yeah, very important. Thank you for reminding me of that. It is
You bet. Well, now everybody that's listening has a good idea about why when Sarah and I went to create Presence, we asked Gerry if he'd be willing to manage creating Presence. So Lakeside is doing that for us.
and it's our privilege.
I was really struck, Gerry, by your comments about authenticity. And, made me wonder in the complexities of our culture, politics, global events, how do you maintain your authentic self when you're leading? When, you might also be impacted by experiences of injustice or trauma that's unfolding around us now.
You would bring that up.
Yeah, I would.
Sarah, it's a great question. And I will tell you that for those of us that actually care about what's going on around us, this has been the hardest sequence of time I've ever experienced. The radicalization of our opinions has been so polarizing in our life, in our country, and that impacts our workplace. Because I have people that I work with who have varied positions and who are sympathetic to different causes in different ways because of their life experiences. I think for leaders today, navigating that is one of the most difficult things, at least that I have experienced, and I know other leaders have as well, that trying to stay open to positions that are crazy in terms of my own expression of it is really hard. I mean, we are trying to heal trauma with children and adults in any way that we can in the varied spheres of government, life, and human services, and mental health, and drug addiction. And we're trying to do that work of healing while we have a huge illustration of leaders who support violence, who support dissonance, who are revengeful, who are angry, who are out to get people, who are, and all of a sudden we've got a following of that. Not only, and we're all facing it in our staff, and so we're doing this mission of healing and hope and doing all these intricacies of making it safe, and we have a world that's unsafe. I just read some research that focused on looking at countries that have violent tendencies and their children's responses to it. And two of the things that came out of the research was they tend to use violence as their main means for conflict resolution. So they don't process it, they just enact violence. But it also is a coping mechanism for when they're stressed. So if we're building whole cultures of that, what is it doing to our world? What is it doing to our children? And how are we able to then even begin to violate their legacies of violence by telling them to do something completely different? So it's made our job so much harder. And it's discouraging when it even penetrates your own organization. And you have to back up and think about what is a trauma-informed response to this particular issue, no matter what I'm feeling about it today. So I think it's one of the hardest issues that at least I've encountered in my last 39 years, in the past few years of dealing it from COVID all the way through some of the difficult issues that we're facing today and trying to be equitable to all people. I don't know if I answered that well. I just
You
told you
did. You answered it very thoroughly, made me kind of think about a lot of what we are all going through and how challenging it is to try to manage it all.
Right.
For me as a teacher, it's quite difficult.
Yeah, we're always navigating. We're always navigating.
Exactly.
Right.
So how do you, in your position, recognize traumatic stress in the workplace and respond to support your team and your mission? How do you do it?
Yeah, I think we've got to set the stage for that, because I think that we've talked about our environment and that it's got to be calming. I mean, there's music that plays to calm people. But I think permission to be dysregulated and permission to get regulation is key. Do we need solitude every day? Yeah. Do we try to create it in the office, in the environment, in the programs? Do we allow that in light of the busyness that we have to do? Yeah, we have to. In my administration, we have a puzzle, community puzzle. And everybody goes into the cafe and they basically start working the puzzle when they're stressed.
Yeah, they're impossible puzzles, by the way.
I know they're really hard, and it would be the last thing that would regulate me.
Yeah, same.
But you know what? I need to be able to walk in the parking lot. I need to go break from my office. I need to sit down and talk to somebody about whatever it is that we're struggling with together. I need to have fidgets. I need to, really have those breaks in life. We call them brain breaks, but breaks in life where your leadership is supportive of you doing that. Because in the old school way in which I was raised in the business world, well, people are lazy and they're not doing their job and they're being ineffective well, wait a minute, maybe they're just regulating from the stress that was just created by somebody out in the world that had nothing to do with anything that I've done. It's just the way that life is, or something's going on in their family, which is really hard. So I think that means they've got to be educated about their own brain and their own stress levels and how they do that, and to give them permission. And it's fun when people come to me and say, I need to do this differently right now in my life because my mom just fell and I've got to be at the hospital to help her. Can I adjust my work schedule and do this and take a break here and do that because I'm so stressed? I love that, because now we're being real about what life is, and And we believe that you should keep your personal and all your other stuff life away from the workplace.
Yeah, if
I
only.
really don't support that idea because it's fake.
Yeah,
It's not how we do things. So it's going to come into the workplace. Why don't we talk about it?
right.
Right. It,
So
it
that's
reminds
important.
me
Go ahead.
too of those conversations we have about defining this work as emotional labor
Correct.
and recognizing that, we can't just leave other parts of ourselves at the door when we come to work, and also really thinking about the patterns of spurts of hard work and inspiration balanced with recovery in our energy and needing to have those breaks. And I love the way you talked about building an environment that gives permission for people to become dysregulated and seek regulation. And I have a theory that giving that permission probably helps decrease some of the actual reactivity or dysregulation, because people aren't holding it and
Right.
trying desperately to kind of keep themselves from feeling whatever the feelings are, but
Yeah,
instead of knowing that they can have them and allow them to pass and get what they need. That feels so humanizing.
right. Well, calm, clarifying, and regulated puts you in the cognitive part of the brain, which is your best place to be.
Right.
If you're in the lower part of your brain, you're just being reactive all the time. And we want to make sure that we're being cognitive in how we do our work together. And that means I've got to be able to be regulated to do that. So it's important to understand that in a neurological way.
Well,
You,
I imagine it also means you have to allow yourself to be dysregulated, sometimes in order to role model that it's safe.
yeah,
Is
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, I think that's the hard part, I think, is being vulnerable
Yeah,
about that to say, yeah, that dysregulates me. And it happened to be something they did. Um,
yeah.
how do you do that diplomatically?
I think
But I think that's important.
I think it's important for people to know that you are in charge of several schools, alternative schools for kids that have problems, and a huge array of training programs. So, do you have an expectation that the people that you hire are going to get some training in all this?
They do. We spend our first 2 weeks of being together in our programs in August, doing training at many levels. I mean, some of it is very related to how we're going to approach, but our first 2 sessions with new staff is to talk about brain regulation and what it means, not only for them as being co-regulated, but also what it means for students and people they're working with to be regulated. So we start right from the get-go. We teach them that before we teach our values, as an important part of what we do. So, and of course, over time, you got to keep on doing this. This is a really a community of practice over a long period of time, because you can't just teach once and hope that everyone gets it, because it takes us a long time. Because in education or clinical work or anything, this is a big paradigm shift from
Huge.
what you used to do, Sandy, in terms of the DSM and the drugs and the whatever,
Right.
versus the relational pieces, which is longer, harder, more difficult work. But as we're educating people about their own ability to regulate their brains, this really becomes a mantra for, hey, how are you doing today? And it gives it a depth of meaning. I'm not trying to listen to what you're presenting or just saying. I want to know what's behind it. And, I always look at people and say, whatever you're seeing, isn't it? What's behind it
Right.
is really it, which is why active listening is so important, because you're trying to figure out where they really are. So.
And you've had a lot of experience in different kinds of workplaces. So do you see these attitudes and changes paying off in the workplace?
Oh, I do 100%. Um, from people walking in the building and saying, well, I feel calm because I'm here, to how we resolve problems, whether it's going to be stressful or whether it's going to be conflictual or whether it's going to be calming as an outcome. And the beginning of all conflict is always difficult for most people, but I think if we can begin to relax everyone, I say a lot of things like, look, you're here, you're safe. Whatever you say is fine with me. You can feel free to say anything you need to, whether I agree with it or not. But I want to come to a good conclusion that we're on the same page and we're being resonant with each other. I think if you can begin to set that posture in conflict resolution, then really it is a safe place to be and people can feel good about raising their issues. Because what I find is their issues are usually have a good base to them. There's a good reason why they're saying what they're saying. It may not come out straight and it may be crooked in how they say it. But in the process, when we get to the end of the result, I learn, they learn, and we come at it from a perspective of appreciation and gratitude for each other and how we've done it and doing things in a way that we focus on how we're doing it is just as important as what we do.
How do you recognize traumatic stress in the workplace? Like, what is it that you see in your staff members? Because, according to Gallup's State of the Global Workplace report, 52% of American workers say that they're stressed.
Yes.
So how do you respond?
What's in your toolkit
Yeah.
besides the puzzles?
That's that there's a multifaceted answer to a lot of that. I'll talk about the toolkit a little bit later, but I think in the process of how do we recognize it, like anything in behavioral understanding, you get to know people's baseline. Who are you? Who are they? How do they normally react? Then when you see something going a little bit different than that, you begin to realize there's something else going on, which requires a leader to know the people, particularly the ones that are in your inner circle. But even when I meet our staff, we have 400 staff right now. So even when I meet some staff for the first time, I have to begin to notice their affect when they're coming in. And usually when they're coming into my office, it's usually for an interesting reason. So I've got to immediately respond with, hey, who are you? And let them be who they are and express themselves. So the first thing I'm doing is a lot of listening, but I'm then watching for stress responses, hypersensitivity and high threat and defensive language. And so it takes a little bit of skill and time to learn those issues and to be aware of what their baseline is and realize that they're giving you a stress response. And then, if we are really working hard to know them and we are listening carefully, it's pretty easy to determine that they're under stress and to recognize that. But it really does require some relational work and some knowledge and some ability to say, okay, I know who this person is and they're not being that. I had a meeting like that yesterday where I got a little bit attacked by someone. You didn't do this and you didn't do this. And of course, from my perspective, they had forgotten something that we had agreed upon. So I had to gently remind them. I said, well, I thought this was where our discussion was. Well, you did this and you did that. And I'm going, well, I hear that. And I'm understanding that that's what you're feeling. And I'm very apologetic about the fact that that's what your perception is. But do you remember the meeting we had where we agreed on this? And they went, yeah, but it's still da 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 da. I said, so I don't think I ever resolved it, but I think it's very interesting that we not become defensive and that we basically focus on the facts and try to build a resonant dynamic. So how do I know their stress? I know their baseline. And when they deviate from it and they're not in their normal space, or when they've told me they actually have like a family issue or a death or something that they are living through, I can be empathetic to that moment. So what's my toolkit? That was another question. I like these three things: mindfulness, hope, and compassion. Mindfulness is that I'm attuned and aware, and I work at it to know the emotions of the people around me. That I'm clear about the fact that these emotional responses and emotional reactions are so important to who they are and what they're trying to communicate. Hope is the ability to vision for the future that often is not seen. When you're developing people, a lot of what you're doing is telling them what they can be. And so when you vision for them, I've used that as a problem-solving mechanism. People come, I have all these problems now, and I got all this going on. I can't do this. And one person came to me and said, I can't do my job because of what you have created around me. And I began to vision with her about what the job is going to be. And she went, oh, that's what you're doing. Oh, you're building me. Oh, you're creating this. Oh, you know. So the illumination that they get from your vision and your hope for them that isn't yet seen is always an interesting part of a leader that has a good something in their toolkit, because you need to use it sometimes to help them get perspective on where they are. And compassion, just empathy in action. I need to be empathetic, but I also need to do something with it. It's not just, oh, I'm feeling what you're feeling and those kinds of things, but it's deeper than that, because now what are we doing to implement a system that shows that we have empathy for who you are and what you're doing? So mindfulness, hope, and compassion, my toolkit.
I think that these are vital, well, often called soft skills,
right?
For the next generation of leaders. And what do you think is the responsibility of you and people like you now to shape the next generation?
Well, I've learned what I've learned through 39 years of experimentation and or failure and or success. How does a young person or a new person into leadership learn that unless they have us to share that, A, it's okay to feel what you feel, but these are the strategies and the ways I have tried to use situations so that they can come out to a good place. What is the inherent wisdom and knowledge that people need to know this? Because if they haven't had the experience, they can dream about it, they can think about it, but they don't have a base to say, oh, this person did this. So I have lots of fun stories about what I've gone through, because I've built an organization from almost nothing, very small organization, to this fairly significant, impactful organization that reaches 8,000 students a year and 20,000 participants a year in so many schools and countries, and also working with presidents to go across the world with your message and training and skills. So what do you learn when you do all of that? Quite a bit. From telling people you can't listen to someone that's dissonant and angry, to, well, here's how we support each other, to here's programmatically what we need to do, to how we affect each other, to your impact and all of that. So I think that in the process of, we don't convey that wisdom and ability and knowledge and skill, and that we're modeling it and we're demonstrating it and we're showing them how it works. They need to know how we learned our lessons and the evolution of our trauma-informed perspective. They need to know, how did I come to this trauma-informed idea, and why is it significant for the growth and development of our organization? We're known because we are staff supportive. How do you get that reputation in a world where you can't pay as much as most people and you can't do all the things? How do you get that reputation? By all these small things that we do that show staff that we care about them, from the design of their office to appreciation events to how we run our organization. And that does impact policies, procedures, and how we do what we do. And so that's why creating presence is a vital part of the development of this in organizations throughout the world, because we all need that kind of support as lonely leaders out here doing what we do. And to tell people, understand it's an isolating job to be a leader, and to be okay with that, in the sense that you need to get support for yourself, and to give them permission to not perform, but to be real in who they are. So
thanks so much, Gerry. And thank you for listening to Creating Presence. Join us next week. Sandy and I will talk more about what it means to lead in a trauma-informed organization. You can reach us at creatingpresence.net or voiceamerica.com. See you next week.